Hello, and welcome to the Family Histories Podcast, the show for and about those of us who are sat quietly in libraries, archives, and spare rooms all around the world, tirelessly piecing together our collective social and family history. My name is Andrew Martin. I'm a family historian, and I'll be your host. In this episode, The Nationalist, we'll be hearing about a man who was dedicated to fighting for Irish independence, and then we'll be on the lookout for a couple who vanish after 1911 in County Mayo, Ireland. So, put down that old passenger list, grab a cuppa, and let's meet our guest. Today, I'm joined by an Irish genealogist whose enthusiasm and drive led him to co-found the Hidden Branch, and he has been promoting genealogy as a fun pastime and potential occupation amongst younger people through social media, podcasts, conference lectures, and TikTok videos. He is also the creator of Project Infant, which is dedicated to every victim to the mother and baby homes of Ireland. So, before he starts live blogging this episode, I think it's time to meet my guest, Daniel Loftus. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the Family Histories Podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. It's good to be on.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Now, we always start with the same question, which is, what was it that first got you hooked on researching family history?
Well, I suppose this is going to be a bit strange for some, but it would have been back in 2017, and It was kind of I suppose within about 4 months, I had lost my granddad and my grand uncle, his brother Padraig.
Oh.
And at Padraig's funeral in January, my grandfather died in May. We were at his wake, and my sister and I were sitting on 2 chairs in the corner of the funeral home, just looking around while my parents were talking to our family. And my sister and I were just looking at each other going, who are half these people? Because we didn't know many of them. We could pick out a few that we knew, but we didn't really know everyone there.
Yeah.
And when we finished up at the wake and at the funeral home, we were on the way home, and where the wake was in Dublin, back to my home, it's about a 2.5-hour drive. And it's a bit of a stint. And of course, what else would 13-year-old me want to do other than quiz my parents on what did they know about their family history.
Okay, yeah.
And it just spiraled from there, which then led me to kind of Googling, as you would normally Google, about how to create family trees. And we didn't really know much. All that my mum really knew about her side was she had a granddad who she had met and she still had letters from, and he died when she was 16.
Okay.
And my dad could remember one of his grandparents and not much else.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until that exact Christmas, so December 2017, that we had sent out Christmas cards. And of course, like every other family historian probably has done, right on the side of the card that doesn't really have much in it, and say, we're creating a family tree. If you would happen to have any information you can supply us with, would you mind emailing it to and giving our email addresses? And surprise, surprise, we didn't get a whole lot, but we got a few bits to work with.
To be fair, that's quite a good idea to do when you're sending out Christmas cards. I mean, Christmas cards are not so much a thing now, but for those people who do send them, to send that message out to perhaps for some people, the annual communication to some relatives is the Christmas card. To send that out and say, hey, actually, we'd like some information back from you is quite a good idea. So I'm a bit sad for you that you didn't get a massive response.
I know, but some people were open to talking about it. Like I had a few cousins who had sent me some stuff kind of saying, oh, I'm glad you're doing this. And they just like hurl digital, not an actual file, full of papers at me of, different files about my family history and different census returns. And at the time, I didn't really know what to make of it all. All I just saw was like names and ages on a sheet of paper. And it's just like, here, work this out. In terms of my dad's side, there wasn't a whole lot to go off of. I think one cousin of my dad's, he emailed and he sent me this long email filled with like an account of his memories of my dad's paternal grandmother, Ellen, and was able to describe to me in depth the house that we used to go and visit. So, where my granddad's family was from, in a place called Beholda in Mayo.
Okay.
We'd always go and visit this old house, and Dad would tell us these new stories that we hadn't really heard about. And it only seemed to be at that house that he would tell us kind of a few stories, maybe a bull that was next door that almost went stampeding at my grandfather, or, just the random stories that just came out. And my dad's cousin would tell me about how Ellen would bring out a little box in the back of the kitchen. The kitchen was at the back of the house in a little kind of room, and he could remember her bringing out a box, and it would have all the tools to kind of, make up a tobacco pipe and, just little tidbits. And
Okay.
he'd say, oh, if anyone ever went in while she's doing this, she'd always say, if anyone asks you what Granny is doing, please tell them she's cleaning her teeth. And she'd always kind of add these like little tidbits. So instead of, cleaning her teeth, she's smoking a pipe. But
yeah.
in terms of photos, I definitely had more on my mum's side than I had on my dad's side.
Oh, okay.
Ellen and her husband, John, I had a few of. And unfortunately, I don't really have many other.
Wow. So these stories from these relatives, or hearing stories via these relatives, how were you recording them? Because this is your first foray into family history. So
yeah.
How did you learn how to record these, and what was your kind of process to start with?
So most of the communications I had were emails with people. So I would just kind of have a separate folder in my email where I just titled like family tree info in caps, as if I was going to miss it in the very few folders I have. And just, drag any conversations that I have with people into it and just kind of file them away. In terms of any other ones, we'd go some places and, we'd talk to my grandaunt up in Tipperary, who's still alive, and she'd recount all these stories about, my grandfather and their family and how they were growing up and different things like that. And I'd try and write that down, because I actually never asked the recorder, so I didn't want to kind of go like, hey, can you repeat that for the microphone?
Okay. So do you have a favourite type of record that you like to research with?
I suppose my favourite is civil, because civil records are those where, there will always be a beginning and potentially a middle and an end. And that being said, it really kind of brings to life the history that can lead you on to see other things. For example, looking through a load of death entries for Cork, that, you see different things about local events that you wouldn't really see or hear about.
Yeah.
You hear about the fires or like court cases that might have happened, or, there was actually two that I came across that were two boys in 1969 had died on campus of my college. And it was ironic considering, I'm starting it very soon, and just seeing, two boys. I think one was a plumber's apprentice and he had fallen down a hole in part of a floor, later died in hospital. And another one, a bit more gruesome, so I won't go into too much detail, but had died on the garden of the campus.
Oh dear.
So I just found it ironic that I had seen those two things just before I start. But I think it's the main way that you kind of glean. It's sort of like a stepping stone to learn about local events that might have happened, or you read about local celebrities who might have died as well. So that would probably be my favourite.
Now, you are to me, you are a younger researcher, and that's a very easy thing for me to say, because I think you're considerably younger than I am. But I would be curious to find out what challenges you've faced as a younger researcher.
Oh my, I suppose now I haven't necessarily experienced it as much as of late, but definitely when I was kind of starting out, there was a little more prejudice towards younger researchers and the
Okay.
part that kind of still reigns on, thinking that, younger genealogists aren't necessarily capable of doing, historical research, that sort of thing. And the thing is, everyone starts somewhere. There's a clear cut way that, everyone's going to be a doctorate level researcher by the time you start. Like there is, like people learn at different paces, people work at different paces.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in terms of challenges, I suppose the costs as well.
Yeah.
With subscriptions to, sites that we all use for our research, added up, it can add up to a lot, regardless of whether you're on a full-time job or whether you're on a student wage or whether you're retired. It just seems that, the cost of everything is going up in terms of to access, records just to try and research. And eventually it will price people out trying to do things as well.
Yeah, it's sad. It's a shame. So, I mean, perhaps linking on to that, what do you think that the genealogy community could do to better provide for people beginning their research journey?
Well, I suppose kind of an example of what I see is often in Facebook groups, but not necessarily towards younger genealogists, but towards people starting at whatever age. People instantaneously assume that, oh, everyone must have a basic knowledge of, what they're dealing with, but not everyone does, and not everyone knows where to look. And I think even just something as simple as, linking to a simple how-to article or a video on YouTube that explains something, or, it doesn't have to be, I suppose, a large gesture, just so like some little thing to just help people on their way, or,
Yeah.
because I'm still very new to DNA, and in some groups there are, I suppose, a bit of conflict where people are very quick to kind of, I suppose, slate others for, not having much knowledge about DNA. And I do not consider myself a professional with DNA, especially because I'm still new to it. I'd only done a DNA test last year.
Yeah.
And just trying to, I suppose, wrap my head around it all, just even trying to broach the topic of DNA. Now, while I wouldn't be one giving advice or anything with DNA, but seeing some people who do, they instantly presume that, oh, you don't know a thing, you're wrong, or how dare you make that assumption, or, granted that is not everyone, but I just have seen some groups that do have that kind of a attitude about them.
It's sad when really DNA is actually a fairly young thing for people to talk about and to learn about. And there's so much that people are still learning about. So for people to feel that they are experts is okay, but to be negative or try and put people off in the way that they talk to them is not really on at all. It's a sad behavior that would be helpful if it just stopped. So fingers crossed that people stop taking that approach to kind of calling out people's assumed lack of knowledge in that area. I obviously alluded to in the introduction that you founded Project Infant. How would you describe this project and why did you start that?
Well, when you mentioned to do with mother and baby homes at the start, the thing is, it's kind of taken a bit of a curve to it because, while the primary focus will and has always been mother and baby homes, it's also trying to find children and mothers or whoever died in other institutions around Ireland. So, there aren't many databases out there for people who might have died in Magdalen Laundry.
Right, okay.
Or industrial schools or, other different places. Now, my main focus will always be mother and baby homes. But if I can just do my bit, to find the names of those who died in those institutions as well and make them available, it's something for people who are campaigning actively for those institutions that they can use. So it's trying to bring people's names to light and to try and, make sure they're not hidden. But it's been going 2 years and 2 months now.
Yep.
And it's been great because I'd started it after my own mother was born in a mother and baby home. So she was born in Besborough down in County Cork. And, we didn't know a whole lot about her family. And it wasn't long after, I think, her 47th birthday that she got a call from the adoption agency TUSLA in Ireland, where they had basically just said, "You have a half sister looking for you. Would you like to talk to her?"
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, but Mum was ready for it because, it was the right time for her to kind of start looking.
Yeah.
And eventually, after a while, they got in contact with their birth mother, who for this I'm going to call Anna.
Hmm.
And when my mum, her half sister, met Anna, it was brilliant because when you saw a photo of the three of them, you just realized that, oh my God, like, there's finally someone that kind of looks like them. It was weird. Um, I've met Anna twice now,
Okay.
and you know, she's lovely because, she's went through that. And the thing is, you never would have guessed. If you met her, you never would have guessed. And the thing is with mother and baby homes is people don't realize how much of an impact that it had on the Irish population and its diaspora, because obviously you had the foreign adoptions and that sort of thing, and people move and all of that.
Yeah.
So people think it only happened to a certain class or a certain group of people, when in theory you'd be surprised at how easy it is to be related to a mother or a child who was born or who died in an institution. It really doesn't take much looking.
This is obviously very controversial and tied into that political topic. But you recently appeared in the Irish media talking about Project Infants alongside one of our former guests, Claire Bradley, Series 4, everyone, if you want to have a listen to that, calling for greater use of DNA to identify the victims of the mother and baby homes. What sort of impact did that have, or do you feel that it had?
Well, that piece is about the two mother and baby home because they are hopefully going to start exhuming the remains in February 2025. So it had been confirmed by the director overseeing the whole project that that was going to happen then.
Okay.
And I suppose it had been called out by a number of activists. And when you actually looked and saw what it could encompass for technology that has evolved quite a bit and is being used to identify, John and Jane Does in the United States, the regulations or what was permitted was rather stringent in that people who want to submit a DNA sample to see if they're related to a tomb baby have to know they had a relation in the tomb mother and baby home, which from that point can already be problematic because some people might not even want to talk about it.
Right.
So you got that. Another part is you have to be part of the DNA relations that they'll accept DNA from. So they don't actually take cousins. So you had to be a rather close relation in the fact that it would have to be like a son or a daughter, a grandparent, grandchild,
Okay.
niece, nephew. But the problem is, Tomb closed in 1961 and opened in 1925. If you say that the youngest mother was 18 and she gave birth in 1961, that would put her at 1943. So she'd be in her 80s now. And the parents are going to be long dead.
Mm.
So if you're trying to identify a child who died there, you're not going to get DNA from the grandparents. You are likely, depending on how old the siblings are, you might not get much from granduncle, grandaunt, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it falls down to the younger generation to try and see, oh, do they know anything about it or not? And they may not.
Nope.
And the problem is it cuts out what you can use. And the problem is they aren't going to use a database such as GED Match, or they aren't going to use Family Tree DNA. They are creating their own one from the ground up. And unless you know that you have a relation as part of or who died in the tomb home, then you may or may not be able to give DNA. And it's going to be, I think, one of the most expensive undertakings they've ever done. And if you were spending this much on this effort, wouldn't you like to have something Or wouldn't you like to do it thoroughly? Wouldn't you like to do it so that, it's done right?
Yeah, do it properly.
And you have a chance of like trying to reunite remains with the families.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds very short-sighted
It was.
in that respect, in that there is a lot of cousins, I'm sure, and descendants of cousins that could provide DNA evidence that helps to identify those that they may find whilst they're exhuming, and to bring closure in a way to those stories and those chapters for families.
Yeah. I wanted to give DNA myself because the whole of my father's family is Mayo.
Right.
And Mayo didn't have a mother and baby home. So mothers would have been sent to Tuam because that was the closest one.
Okay.
So a lot of children who you see who died in Tuam, over 200 of them came from Mayo. And that's just the ones that we know who died. And there are 2 locations in the map that I'd drawn up with former addresses listed on the death certificates that actually gave them. There's about 70 that didn't, so that number might actually be bigger. But there are at least 207 children who came from Mayo, and there are, I'd say, about 6 or 8 who came from locations where my family are from.
So it's possible.
So there could be a relation in Tuam that I'm related to that I don't know about. And the only way that I would probably have a chance of knowing is actually sending in my DNA for them to look. But because I don't know where they'd fit in, and I'm a cousin, I'm not a kind of close enough relative, they wouldn't take it. Simple as.
I don't think that you're doing this project alone, or at least please tell me you're not doing this project alone.
God, no.
Do you have volunteers with this?
Yes, I do. And honestly, without them, I don't think any of this would have been possible because I was very naive and foolish at the beginning because I thought, oh, this will only take me a month to do. It's not going to take me that long to do. I'll have this all done very soon.
If only.
26 months later, that's not happening. So no, honestly, I started welcoming volunteers, I'd say a couple of months after 2022, but it didn't really take off until early 2023. Mm-hmm. So since then, I've had, a group of 30 volunteers, and, we all have our own lives going on, whether we're students, whether we're full-time workers, any of that. So, on and off, I could have any people from that 30 coming in to help to try and conduct research, to try and find the children's names. And it's really spread the load in trying to research more and get more out because, I could be working on the uploading behind the scenes while they're going, oh, well, we found 50 more names here that you might want to add or different things like that. And it's been vital to how Project Inman operates and how it does what it does.
Is there a way that people can perhaps still volunteer?
Oh, of course. I could never say no to volunteers, honestly, because I suppose, the more there is, the more effective it'll be. So, yeah, it had been a question I got so much that I just decided, right, let's just create a web page just for that. Mm-hmm. So if you want to learn more about how to volunteer, if you're interested in learning about and wanting to help search for names of mother and baby homes, the best place to go would be projectinfant.ie/volunteer. And all the information is there.
As you clamber through the branches of your family tree, you'll no doubt meet some interesting characters. With this in mind, it's now time to ask our guest to pick one of their most fascinatingly good, bad, or just plain ugly relatives that they've researched, and then tell their life story. So, Daniel, who are you going to introduce us to?
That would be my great-grandfather Patrick, or who I'll refer to him as his nickname, which was Pax Whelan.
Okay.
So Pax was born on July 8th of 1890 in Dungarvan in Waterford to Patrick Whelan, otherwise known as Patsy, and his mother, Bridget Carey.
Okay.
He was the second of 6 kids, and he had one half-brother, which was one of those children that his mother had from a previous marriage, and he was the eldest of his five here. Pax was raised in the local area in O'Connell Street in Dungarvan, and he lost his mother at the age of 8, who died from tuberculosis.
Oh.
And his youngest sister, Mary, was only a month old when her mother died. So she would not have really known her mother at all. And Pax's father, Patsy, was a plumber. And sure enough, one of the many positions that Pax himself would hold later in life was a plumber.
Right.
But in the 1910s, there obviously was tension brewing in Ireland because closer and closer came to the Irish War of Independence and the Irish Civil War. And around 1914 or so, Pax's brother Michael had actually enlisted in the British Army to fight in World War One, and he was a carpenter who would typically just build coffins for the dead soldiers.
Okay, yeah.
And it actually caused a rift between Pax and Michael because Pax wanted to fight for independence, and his grounds or just asking the question to Michael was, why would you go and fight for someone else's country when our one isn't even free? That kind of idea.
Right.
And they didn't talk for a number of decades. And then Pax joined the local branch, the Dungarvan branch of the Irish Republican Army, which was an army fighting for freedom for Ireland. And he rose up the ranks, and when he retired, he became a commander of the local IRA. And there has been a plethora of, I suppose, media and articles written about him in the local museum in Dungarvan. And that has actually been most of where I got the information from.
Right.
And without that, I wouldn't really know a whole lot. But during the war, he met and married Catherine Mary Fraher, who was my great-grandmother, who was the daughter of another local prominent figure, Dan Fraher, who was a hurler and a draper in Grattan Square in Dungarvan.
Yeah, okay.
And on his marriage certificate in 1921, he is listed himself down as a workhouse master. And considering the events that were going on at the time, there was probably a fairly understandable reason as to why he would stick himself down as a workhouse master. There was, due to his IRA ties, he did a bit of lying on his marriage cert.
I bet.
Because he bent his age a little, as he said he was 26 when he was actually 31.
Oh, that is quite a difference.
Yeah, but my grandmother was fairly on point with her age, thankfully. And they would go on to have 4 kids together. And there's 14 years between the oldest and the youngest. And the youngest being my grandmother, Kathleen, and the oldest being my granduncle, Paddy. And Patrick had gone through a lot of loss in his life. He had lost his father not too long after he got married in 1929.
Mm-hmm.
And he, obviously, through the war period, he would have lost a number of, fellow soldiers, and he would have had to bury a lot of people.
Right.
And he actually went through significant bit of loss in his own family because he would bury his wife and one of his daughters within the space of 6 years.
Oh.
So his wife, Catherine, died aged 44 just from tuberculosis. And I have 2 photos, and the one I have, at least to hand, is my grandmother, Kathleen, and her mother holding my grandmother. And it's just a nice little photo because, especially for that time, there wasn't many photos that I know of. And with having that photo, I'm thinking it maybe might have been around 1938, 39,
yeah,
because my grandmother was probably about 1 or 2 in the photo. And Mary, or May as she was known, would also die from tuberculosis at the very young age of 22. And she, I think, as far as the story goes, they had a shed out in the garden, and she was kind of living there because they knew that she was dying, and they tried to keep her in as comfortable as a situation as they could. They'd go out and see her, they'd go out and talk to her, but they just wouldn't go into the same room as her because of the TB. And she'd later be moved to the local hospital where she'd soon die as well. So they were moved or they were both buried in St. Augustine's Church in Dungarvan and Abbeyside. And the headstone is it's a rather plain one. It lists all Pax caught and their 4 kids. Pax himself would be a little, I suppose, hesitant to talk about his time during the war.
Right.
And the only kind of accounts that I have of anything that he did are actually from the military archives. And they come from a collection where I think there were audio recordings of someone reading testimony from Pax, which I haven't managed to go and listen to yet because I need to find an excuse to go up to Dublin. Or actually, no, it's not finding an excuse, it's finding time. But Pax had gone through a lot of trying to, I suppose, to survive the war. And you hear and you read about attacks, that he would have to go through. I was reading one that was called the Burgery, or Burgery ambush, which was in March of 1921.
Yeah.
And it went in detail about, I think they disarmed 30 and, they killed 2. And it's just, it's like a little diary. And it was just one event of so many that had, I suppose, occurred during the whole time. And what was even weirder was that when I had started a college course last year, our first field trip was to a local museum in Cork. And we had gone in and there was a War of Independence exhibition on. And we'd gone in and I was looking at all the photos because I love looking at the photos. And I looked at one and I was looking at all the names, trying to see if anyone I recognized. And I saw Pax Whelan. My heart almost did a double take because I could not believe that my great-grandfather was actually in one of the photos on the exhibition. So it was this big group, and I think it was a photo about a demonstration up in Dublin that he went to, which actually made sense because as far as I know, he got put in prison for a little bit of time after this when he came back for kind of, I suppose, disturbing the peace or something like that. And and it was just this big, group picture of a load of men, and you just see Pax was very tall, so you just saw a very tall man standing near a banister on a big grand staircase, and you could just see his head pop out from everyone else. So you knew it was him.
That's very helpful
Yes.
for researchers many years later to be able to identify him in pictures.
Indeed, and as I said, Pax and his father-in-law Dan were very nationalist, and they would have been trying to revive the Irish language and kind of keep it alive. And on Pax's marriage certificate, he actually wrote part of the bit himself where, it says, "This marriage solemnized between us," and it gives the bride and groom's name. So he actually wrote his and his wife's name down in Irish. So he would have been Pádraig Éalaún, being Patrick Whelan, and she would have been Courtney Araker, meaning caught or Catherine Fraher.
Okay, yeah.
And it was just interesting because when Mum had seen that the first time, she went like, "That's his handwriting." And she could immediately point that out because she remembers the letters that she had from him.
Wow.
And it's actually in a style of hand called the Clo Gaelach, and it's CLO GAELACH, and it's this very fancy Irish script, and I learned that on the college course yesterday. I just never knew the name of it. But later in life, Pax, having buried his wife and his daughter, he had many grandkids, and when I know my mum would try and write to him maybe now and again because they were living in different parts of Ireland, and one thing that I know a couple of my mum's cousins remember was that he was not very open to talking about his time during the war. So
right, okay.
I think after, the War of Independence happened, many of the stories or accounts would have died with them unless there was somebody who decided, no, I'm going to talk about it. I suppose in every generation there's going to be something that people do not wish to talk about or do not want to bring up. And for him, it was this, I suppose, trauma during, the war, that he would have had to, bury people and see people get hurt and everything relating to that. But he lived to a very good age, dying in a local nursing home in Dungarvan, and he died at the age of 96.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And unfortunately, he's on the adopted side, so I will not inherit those good genes, but I'm hoping that I will live a decent while.
Oh, you never know.
Oh, I know.
DNA is an absolute roulette. You know that. So
It really is. But it was interesting because even at his funeral, because he also would have outlived three of his brothers, four if you count the half brother. So he would have outlived a lot of his family.
yeah.
So he died in 1986. And at the funeral, I remember one of my mom's cousins telling me that they remembered that there was this very short lady, very old lady with, very white hair. And they were just whispering amongst themselves. And they just said, "That's Maisie." And Maisie was Pax's sister. And they had hardly ever met this lady before. So even it was only kind of at occasions like that, the people started to show up.
Patrick had been through so much trauma and he survived it. I imagine that he saw many things change during his lifetime.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, every kind of one in that family did have some elements of trauma. Like Pax obviously would have been in the Irish War of Independence. Michael would have been in the First World War. And Mary would have had to experience life as a single mother because she herself had two kids outside of marriage. And she amazingly, despite, societal odds, kept them. And she kept the two of them. And, everyone went through their own, I suppose, challenges in life. And that just happened to be theirs.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Daniel, for telling us the story of Patrick Whelan. But I think it's time for you to face
the brick wall.
Now, don't be shy. I know you've got a brick wall that's been lurking for a few years. In fact, you might be like me and have several of them that just don't seem to make any progress no matter how hard I try. Sometimes you just need a little help, and therefore it's time for my guest to share one of their brick walls in a hope that one of you, dear listeners, might just be able to help. Okay, Daniel, what have you got for us?
Well, I'm going to be a bit cheeky because, especially on my dad's side, there are some parts where after a while it just gets a bit murky trying to find them.
Okay.
Because luckily, the ideas of what they call their children did not span very far from calling them names like Anne, Mary, Bridget, John, Patrick, James.
Yeah, the classics. Yeah.
So we're dealing with the common names here. But my one that I chose were Patrick LAVIN and his wife, Anne Brennan.
Okay.
So all I really know, and sadly it's not a lot, about Patrick is that he was born roughly around 1854, and his wife, Anne Brennan, born in 1861.
Okay. Yeah.
And they tended to stay rather local, so they stayed around a place called Kilchima, which is in Mayo. And Patrick's father, on their marriage of January 23rd, 1882, Pat Lavin was living in Canbrack, which is very small townland as part of Kilchima. And Pat was living at the time of the marriage, and he was the landholder. They were both full age, so minimum they would have had to have been born in 1861. But because I have the census, that put me back to 1854 for Pat. And Anne was from a place called Killusbeg, but I'm still trying to figure out what that is. But because it's Kilchima, I'm going to presume it's not too far from it.
Somewhere there, yeah.
Yeah, and her father was John Brennan, who by 1882 was dead.
Right.
So I have Patrick's father, Patrick, dying in Canbrack in January of 1911. So I know by that point he's dead. And All I do know is that there was a brother of Patrick named Brian who was born in 1868, and it's not a whole lot else after that. They had all daughters. They had six daughters. You had Catherine in 1882, Delia in 1883, Mary in 1885, Annie in 1887, and Ellen and Sarah Jane in 1893.
Mm-hmm.
So I had come across a few that I thought could be them until I saw it was a son who informed that they died, which is rather hard to do. At least, and that's how I know it's not their family.
Okay. Yeah.
So as far as Anne went, there was a few that I thought I had right, but after a bit of digging, I had realized that I had gone wrong. And the last place that I have Patrick and Anne is in the 1911 census, where Patrick was 58, Anne was 50, and then they have three daughters living with them. Catherine, who has been married by this point, is now Catherine Gormley, who's 28, and then you got Sarah and Ellie, who are both 18, and Mary, Annie, and Tommy, who are Catherine's three kids. So after that, they disappear.
So we're looking for a disappearing couple who are probably late 50s, perhaps in their 50s, possibly in their 60s when they kind of go missing.
Yeah. In the 1911 census, Patrick is given as 58 and Anne is given as 50. So at the very minimum, potentially, but I know how ages can be on Irish census. So
yeah, they can be either way by a few years. Just so that we've got some idea for the listeners, how are we spelling some surnames here? So you've got LAVIN and Brennan.
So Brennan, I have only really seen one way in the records, and that's BRENNAN. And then LAVIN has two ways, especially in my family. You've got LAVIN, or you've got the same spelling, but the I is another A.
Okay, I can see that. That's great. So we last see this couple in 1911, and you have no idea where they go next.
No, and I have tried looking in census records. I've tried finding newspapers, and I've got nothing on any of them.
Have you looked to see if they have emigrated at all?
I did try, but the only ones that I do know that had emigrated was Mary, who had gone to America, Ellen, who had gone to America, and Catherine had gone to Lancashire. So apart from them, I can't seem to find them emigrating anywhere. Okay,
well, what's the best way for listeners to contact you if they think that they have a research clue or an idea that could help solve this?
The easiest way would probably be if you have your preferred social media choice. I'm probably on it. So the place to try and find all of that would be my name. So danielloftus.card, which is CARRD.co. And then when you get to that, it's one big page to find me. But if you have me on Twitter, I am Daniel M. Loftus. And that'll probably be one of the main ways.
Okay, well, we will, of course, pop that into the show notes for this episode, and listeners can head over to familyhistoriespodcast.com where they can read that, or they can send us a message, or they can even email us at hello@familyhistoriespodcast.com, and of course we'll pass that message on to Daniel. Now, whilst those pencils eagerly scribble down the last of those notes, there's just a chance that I might be able to help you with this. But you're going to need to follow me through to the garage.
Oh, go on then.
Here we are, one secret time machine.
Well, this is not what I was expecting.
Oh, well, I thought you might like a little trip back in time to try and solve your brick wall for your... What are you doing?
I just thought I'd live stream this. It'll go viral.
Viral? Oh, no, don't do that. Oh, last thing I need is a coach tour turning up or a stinker of a review on TripAdvisor.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. So does this thing work then?
Of course it does. This is a fully functioning, highly calibrated masterpiece of science. And if you'd like to have a go, you could grab a seat over there.
Well, I guess I'll give it a shot.
That's the spirit. Now, when and where would be best to go back to try and solve your brick wall for yourself?
I think it would have to be the 8th of March 1937 in Swinford, County Mayo in Ireland, to Sarah Jane LAVIN, their daughter, on their marriage day.
Oh, another wedding. I love it. There we go. That's all set. Oh, almost forgot. I sort of need a favour, well, an errand really, and it needs to be done first.
Oh, an errand. Can't you do it later?
Actually, no. Sorry. That wouldn't be a good idea. It really, really needs to be you. Don't worry, though. There. I just need you to take this little note and deliver it for me.
Me too.
Oh, you'll know who. Just hand it over to them. It's very important.
Okay, go on then. But then I need to go to Swinford.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you. You'll need this. It's a temporal beacon. Once you've delivered the note, just press the purple button on the side to go on to Swinford. And then when you're done there, press the bigger button on the top to come home.
Why can't you do this?
It's complicated. I'll sort of explain it later. Oh, here we go. Daniel Loftus, thank you, goodbye, and good luck. Come on. Bingo. Oh, phew. I need a holiday. Oh, it's you. Hello, you. You're not meant to be here, I know, but I really... Oh. Hello, Shandor.
Hello. I got more messages. What? Two of you? Oh no, this is not good.